2 weeks of January 2024, the keen focus has been on the education sector, owing to the fact of the KCSE results as well as the KCP student that are still ongoing and reporting to various institutions across the country. Over 1.4 million students in various institutions since their results came out late last year. Welcome to the show once more. My name is Abdiaziz. Hashim, this will be our conversation for the first hour, but to the second hour we'll be discussing on matters related to corruption, which has been, of course, exacerbated by the talks not just from the executive, the judiciary, but the legislators and the leaders alike. What are the constitutional requirements, especially when it comes to the doctrine of separation of powers? That will be our discussion in the second hour. But in the first hour, to give a little bit of context of what we'll be discussing, is still on the ongoing Form 1 reporting to various institutions across the country. You do know that 1.4 million Form 1 students are reporting to school and are still since the start of 15th of January 2024. Now, in the national schools, about 42,927 students are reporting there. Special needs education, we have 2,225 students. Extra county schools, we have 274,746. County schools, we do have 288,201,000. And finally, in the sub-county category schools, we have 792,230. And of course, this morning we'll be focusing on the cost of education. Has it gone up? Kindly get in touch with us on our social media platforms at Abdiaziz Hashim 1 and at KBC Channel 1. But here with me in the studio this morning, we'll be having around almost 6 guests, but right now we do have Joshua Nyambane, the educationist, as also a tutor in this country. We also do have Ashioya, Biko, an advocate of the High Court. We do understand you also have an interest in this education sector, given that you're a parent as well.
Absolutely.
Yes. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. But let me start with Joshua here. Joshua, the bone of contention or the million-dollar question is that has education become expensive in this country, especially in the secondary school sector?
Thank you very much, Abdi. I just want to say first that education is a fundamental force towards changing the social-economic disparities that occur. I also want to say that education is one of the sustainable development goals. The vision, the global goal number 4, to focus on the access to education. Looking at the economic status of this country, it's also very imperative to note that there is a big gap between the rich and the poor. And that means that the poverty rates are very high. As the Form 1s report to school, of course, the public school sector is majorly financed by the government because of the government policy of at least 100% transition from primary level to high school. We wish to note that there is a lot of complaints from parents, particularly when it comes to the cost. We say in most of the public day schools, the government has basically increased capitation and reduced that inequality in terms of the cost of education. But again, there is a lot of associated costs when it comes to taking our young boys and girls to school. Particularly the buying of uniforms is still very high, considering the VAT and of course the textbooks. Getting these textbooks very high because the suppliers and actually because of the taxation policy that we have as a country as of now, it made actually education quite expensive. Still, in most of the public secondary schools, the government has not come up with an intervention to reduce the cost of tuition fee. Of course, there is still the charging of the tuition fees and also the bonding fees, which is not basically ogling very well. And this will actually reduce the number of Kenyans receiving or accessing education. This is something that we need to look at, particularly now the government must prioritize, more increment and interventions towards making education cheaper, perhaps increase bursary allocations and also establish other mechanisms like scholarships that will make sure that as many Kenyans access education as possible. Basically to achieve the goal of increased workforce in terms of skilled workforce going forward. Of course, we are a third world country and we expect this, but just to recognize the endeavors made by the government institutions, particularly the Ministry of Education and also Parliament in allocation of more capitation in the Ministry of Education.
Yes.
Thank you.
And of course, given that I'm coming back to you, Wakili, in just a few, you're a tutor, Joshua. We're talking about, in terms of capitation, over 600 billion has been allocated already to the education sector, and more has been allocated as well in terms of the supplementary budget. But what can be done, given that you're a tutor, you're on the ground, what can be done to ease the burden of parents, especially during these harsh economic times?
Thank you very much. We appreciate, I always listen to the President speak. We appreciate there is a lot of prioritizing of, capitation in the Ministry of Education, as it were. But still, maybe quite practical interventions could be taken. For example, subsidies in the associated costs that I did mention about, particular development fee that is charged by many of the public schools, most likely put funds towards the development kitty in many of these schools to expand the facilities that are of basic nature, for example the labs. The government can also come with specific grants, which are conditional in nature, basically to ensure that the public sector education is more, enhanced in terms of funding. Yes. We can also pursue other non-state actors. There is non-governmental organizations and, individuals of goodwill, communities, allow them to come in to assist in terms of provision of education. Finally, the government could also look at multinational corporations, as it were, also local industries. A good example is Safaricom, which can be able to assist. When it comes to textbooks or the resources, we can also, enhance more investment in, of course, online educational resources. As opposed to buying of physical textbooks, we can actually explore a policy where we actually invest in the digital literacy. A lot of materials could be found online. Also, we can also pursue, going forward, as an intervention, to establish online classes. And this would lead to learners not necessarily moving physically to school, and this will actually reduce the cost of education, for example, transportation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. But let me head over to Wakili. Wakili, you also have much interest, given that you're also a parent in this country. Maybe tell us, given that you have experience now taking a child to school, is the cost of education, have you felt that pinch of giving out those funds, and in terms of taking your child to school?
Thank you so much. let me start by stating that basic education is a fundamental right to the children of Kenya, and it is it is a right that is enshrined in the Constitution of Kenya. And so it should be something that is easily accessible to the sons and daughters of this country. You asked the question as to the affordability of education, and I can tell you that the cost of education has exponentially gone up, and it is a worrying trend. It is a worrying trend, and I think most of Kenyans who feel like they can afford some decent education for their sons and daughters,
yes,
do not actually prefer to take their sons and daughters to public schools. And so the private sector has also come in to capitalize on this need by parents to give their children a decent education, to give a premium to this service that then they are giving to Kenyans. So as to the question of the affordability of education in this country,
yes,
I would want to state very categorically that it's really gone up. And I shudder to imagine Mama Mboga or mtu wa boda boda who then would want to have decent education for their kids, and they have to take their kids to private schools. There is, of course, we have very good public schools, but then the numbers are overwhelming. If you look at the policies that government put in from the year 2002, when Kibaki took, the former President Kibaki put in mechanisms to ensure that we had all children access basic education, then we've had the numbers go up quite high.
Yes.
The question that we ask ourselves, and the questions that we should be asking ourselves as Kenyans, is whether we have infrastructure that matches the number of the children that are attending school.
Yes.
Because my brother here talked about the issues of 100% transition. And back in the days when we had, like in the year 2002, when we had the free primary education, where it was a government policy that every child must attend school.
Yes.
Right. So if we are coming up with a policy where we are saying that every child must attend school, do we have attendant policies that also speak to the to the increased number of children who are attending school? Do we have equal infrastructure that is put in place? Do we have teachers? Do we have and so on and so forth? And the answer to those questions is actually an absolute no. Yes. And that is why you are seeing the private sector in the private sector is capitalizing on the decreased number of teachers, of
yes,
infrastructure and so on and so forth, to ensure that then they can fill in that gap. And it is a market. It is a free market. If the demand is high, like it is in the education sector right now,
yes,
definitely it comes at a premium. And it is that premium that they do, that the private education sector is now capitalizing on. And education in this country is not cheap by by any feat. Yes.
And if you're just joining us, dear viewers, we're discussing on matters to do with the state of the education and the cost of it now that all the students are reporting to school, especially for the Form 1s, and we do have the ones in the KCSE results that of the 2023 that were released by the Education Cabinet Secretary, that is Ezekiel Machogu, a few weeks back, are reporting to various institutions across the country. And of course, the question is, has the cost of education gone up? Kindly talk to us through our social media platforms at Abdiaziz, Hashim, and at KBC Channel 1. Out of the 1.4 million students who are currently reporting to various institutions across the country, I enumerated the numbers in terms of the national schools. We do have 42,927 who have reported to those institutions. We do have in the special needs education sector 2,225 students, and in the extra county schools we do have 274,746, where the extra county schools, that is the figure, well, the county schools is 288,201, but the bulk of those students, the 1.4 million, will be heading over to the sub-county schools, 792,230. Now, given that the government even lowered, this current administration lowered in terms of the school fees level, for example, when it comes to the national school, it is 53,000 as a parent you will be required to pay that, and in the county school it is 45,000. But let me pick it the conversation with Daktari who has just joined us, Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa. He is the Executive Director at Usawa Agenda. Daktari, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
We started off with the cost of education. You've just heard the figures that I was talking about in terms of the national school as well as the county. The same question that I had asked earlier, Joshua and Wakili here, is the cost of education high now?
They always say, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance.
Okay.
Education all the times, everywhere, has never been cheap. Because it is something that has value. It can never be cheap. I think the question that we need to address ourselves to is, are we living up to our constitutional demand that we afford every Kenyan child quality education?
Yes.
Because that is a constitutional right, that every child must be given quality basic education that is free and compulsory. The government has worked quite hard to try and put more resources in the education sector, and I can confidently say that it is wrong for anyone to even expect that it will be possible to increase budgetary allocation to the Ministry of Education.
Yes.
It is already the highest funded ministry in the government. The problem that we face as a country in the education sector is not, from where I sit, mainly one of a resource issue. It is mainly allocation of the resources and utilization of the resources that we put in that sector. I can tell you, for example, that right now we have a challenge with congestion in some schools.
Yeah.
Yet we have schools that have facilities that have no learners. Why? Because they have been mismanaged and no parent wants to take their child to the school that has been run down, that does not perform well. We have so many schools that have fewer students than their capacity. And we have a few others that have congestion to the brim. Why? Because parents are trying to look for the elusive good performance in the schools. How can we resolve that? It's an administrative issue. Can we hold those who run those schools to account and make sure that they are doing what they ought to do? Can we hold parents in those communities to account? Because I also know that there are school heads who are doing their best, but they are struggling in the schools where they've been sent because there is lack of cooperation from the local communities around them. So that is one problem. The second problem is we have railroaded children into schools without paying attention to whether those schools add value to their lives or not.
Yes.
And I can use this example. We have said basic education is free and compulsory. So if you take a pastoralist boy and bring them to school and tell them you stay in school until 12 years are complete, this boy enrolls in a primary school that has no sufficient teachers and facilities, gets less than 100 marks in primary, because we have had children who scored less than 100 marks in KCPE.
Yes.
You take them to another poorly run secondary school, they stay there for 4 years and get an E. And then you release them back to society. What have you done to them? You have denied this boy the right to grow up as a pastoralist and learn pastoralism as a livelihood. You have not afforded them an opportunity for a new kind of livelihood.
Okay.
Because after scoring their E in school, they go back to the community and try to become pastoralists long after their age mates qualified as pastoralists, who know what to do with livestock, who can make a living out of livestock. You are purely being unjust to this child. We have this in this country, and I've heard the story about the private schools. Private schools are only becoming a dominant feature at the primary level. Why? Because parents are preferring, those who have money are preferring to invest heavily in the primary school education level of their children as a way of holding public school opportunities at secondary. Because the public schools that are doing well, the secondary schools that are doing well are mainly public, but privatized national public schools. So someone who pays 300,000 per term or per year for a primary school kid in a high-cost private school, so that child goes to a national school that is public. They're simply crowding out the poor from accessing good quality education. And I think that is something we have to discuss. When we talk of a secondary school, for example, what is it? We have public secondary schools in this country whose principal can actually employ a principal of another public secondary school and pay them. So they can't meet and discuss as principals. They are both principals of public schools, but one and another are worlds apart.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
How is that? What will be the minimum standard of what we call a school? There are children in schools where all they do is grow up. There is no resources, there's no staffing to enable them learn. And then we have schools, a few ones, where people learn. And that is something that we have to confront.
Okay, Daktari, given that you've just clearly stated that the education sector is the most funded sector, which is true, over 600 billion with the current administration, and in the supplementary budget also it was allocated much more funds, over 100 billion. Now, given that we do have a legislator in the House, we do have the senator here with us, the Tana River senator, that is Danson Mungatana. Senator, karibu sana, and of course, given that you're on the ground, Senator, and you have witnessed this situation, we've even seen governors, not just the MPs with their CDF bursary. We have seen governors coming in and issuing out funds to help out those students, given that the CDF funds were not yet released by the Treasury. And the mandate of the Senate is to oversight those funds. Is the issue budgetary, or is the issue managing those resources so that all those students are able to go to school and the finances are catered for?
Okay, first of all, thank you for inviting me here to discuss various aspects of the Kenyan nation and the challenges we are facing. I found you discussing the cost of education.
Yes.
And I will be practical. I was in Tana River County like 2-3 days ago, and I was due to address a public rally in an area called Hurara. So before then, chiefs, the leaders, the local leaders wanted to see me. And amongst the things they presented to me was a boy who had scored 386 points. That's very high, according to me. And he was the top of the entire area. But the father did not have money to take him to school. And so they were pleading with me, and I told them, what about the MP? They said they have not gotten. I said, what about the bursary for the MCA? They have not gotten. And our governor doesn't give any bursary because he says the MCAs have not passed the relevant law. So for us, in fact, our governor, we feel very sad that he has not put the necessary effort, because I think if he had, he would have brought all those MCAs to an agreement so that we have a governor's bursary fund. But there is nothing in Tana River as we are speaking. We see of other people who are sponsoring their students en masse, but Tana River County, our governor has not put the necessary effort to do that. And I think it's a very sad situation which needs to be corrected. But having said that, this young boy was admitted to Kwale High School, but according to them, the cost was very high. So they tried to look for sponsors and whatnot, they couldn't, so they came to me. And now they are telling me that they have sought admission and gotten in Kilifi Township. So the cost of first term, when they send to me, is 23,000. Then you add second term and third term, you end up with about 40,000 for the year. Now add on that, there is a games kit about 1,500. Then there is an article there called bread, which is 4,000. Then there's a student ID, 400. So for admission, when you look at it, 23 plus all those, you're coming about 30,000 that is required to take him to school. 30,000 is well beyond the parent that was before me. And he said he had tried equity wings to fly and all this, and he wasn't successful. So the reality of the matter is that back home, where people are dependent on agriculture for a living, it is actually a real a real struggle to raise fees. So let me just agree with you that actually the cost of education is very high. And that is why we need a very efficient system. And my appeal to the national government, when it is time to release bursaries, let us release them. That is as far as the MPs are concerned, for CDF. And for the MCAs, let us fund them in good time for them to release this money. The other alternative is to make sure that all schools are free for free, you know, so that this money is, instead of them coming there, they're taken directly to the schools, instead of them being divided into MPs, MCAs, governors, and so on. That's another model. But for now, the model that is being utilized, let the money be there in time, because actually, in the villages, it is difficult. However, having said that, I wanted to appeal, I use this forum to appeal to the Kenyans who are listening to me, that education is an investment in your child. And you need to sacrifice for any investment. If you are going to farm, you have to sacrifice for your seeds. If you're going to raise animals, you have to sacrifice to buy them, the initial capital. So for children also, for you to get out a good child who is cultured and educated, you have to sacrifice. Now, education, my appeal to them and to Kenyans who are listening to me, don't wait for the child to teach standard 8 or to go to Form 4 and start wondering what you're going to do with them. You have 5 children, please save for them, even if it's 100 shillings per month, per week, whatever, until they become ready to go to school. That is how you prepare. So when you sell your watermelons, when you sell your onions, when you sell your maize, there is the money that you'll need for food and so on, and then you have your 5 children, take 500 shillings and put it aside, or 1,000, whatever you have done. But remember that in 7 years, that child will require money for the next level. And I know many people will argue, I'm hardly making anything. But you see, if you are serious, this saving is a culture. You actually need to get into the culture of saving and save for education so that you invest on that child. This story of someone coming to say, even to leaders, and as much as leaders want to help, a person who comes to tell me, this 23,000 I'm supposed to pay, Mheshimiwa, I've been saving for so long, and I only have 7,000. And the other one who comes and tells me, I have nothing, between the one of 7,000 and the one of nothing, the likelihood is you will boost the one of 7,000. Okay? Because that one is serious about that child, and you can see he's serious. But the other one who has no plans, no whatever, is leaving things to move with the wind, as in leave it to fate, it is not right. So let us also take the challenge. We get our children, start saving for them from the day they are born. Yeah, because this is what they do. Huko kwa wazungu, that is exactly what they do. From the day a child is born, they start planning for them. In fact, in a place like Saudi, when you are born, the government puts some money in your accounts. Okay? And so you start having a culture of, I have to look after this child as they grow up. So I agree with you, education is expensive, but I also urge people to start investing early. It should not be an emergency when you are taking your child to high school.
Coming back to Joshua, Mheshimiwa has just talked about the cost of education itself and how people are faring on the ground. That is just a tip of the iceberg of where Tana River is. But generally, we have seen institutions especially quarreling with not just even suppliers, but with other people who they owe money to. Some have even gone to court. The same questions that I've asked Mheshimiwa, I'm asking you, given that you're on the ground, is it the management of that resources? Because the education sector has been adequately financed.
Abdi, thank you. I just want to say that the word adequate is also relative. Because first, maybe I will say this, education is expensive, yes. But we must distinguish. There is public education and there is private education. And it's also very key to understand the fact that any country that is developing must invest in education. I agree the government has done much to increase capitation and, in the Ministry of Education, which is basically what they should be doing. And when we say they need to increase more, what we are saying, they don't have to borrow money from outside or wherever for them to increase the capitation of funding. They need to priority in terms of, because of the impact and the benefit of education, which we start to discuss here, the effect, the benefit of education, then we cannot finish. But again, Mheshimiwa said about investment. Kenya, one of the major challenges facing Kenya is actually economic unevenness. The economic status of Kenya is basically fragile. More than 15% of Kenyans, they live below the international standards of poverty line. That means there are some people who cannot even save 5 shillings, even around 100 bob. And this is the mercy of the government, because the government must make sure that there are interventions, practical interventions, and sustainable ones to guarantee education to the people of Kenya. Because then any future plans will not be achieved. I also want to say the example Mheshimiwa has given about Tana River, I'm very sure that is one of the major examples we can give. But there are so many Kenyans. If you go to Marsabit, let me say, I come from Kisii County, and perhaps the county governor is doing maybe a great job comparing Kisii County and Tana River. But again, even the interventions being undertaken does not actually lower the level of education. What I can say from a practical perspective is that we as a country must specifically look at how we can make public education free. Let us look at how can we make public education free, at least for primary education and secondary education. Then we can also do financial literacy, the way Mheshimiwa said. There are people who can engage in saving, perhaps come up with a national insurance kitty, where just like we have the housing fund, where we can be able to save a bit even for those disadvantaged, for the working class, those of us who got the benefit to go to school and can be able to earn salary, then we can also contribute. I know that is an unpopular discussion, but we can contribute to alleviate our brothers and sisters who cannot actually be able to afford taking a child to school. The government can actually just make sure the 40,000 Mheshimiwa has said is not available, is not for the parent to contribute, but scrap it and make public education to be free for both primary and secondary. Finally, education is expensive. It is said that if you want to know that, or let me say this, if you say education is expensive, try ignorance. But again, you see, you cannot be able to, if you cannot afford, you cannot afford. Simple like that. That's simple, practical thing. You cannot afford, you cannot afford. What comes first, education or food? If the government cannot even put more intervention to provide free food program, if it does in certain areas, but why can't we make it that there is a lot of priority in provision of free feeding program to reduce the cost of education in Kenya? Yes.
And of course, Senator, let me correct you there. You clearly talked about Tana River governor not, but if that is the situation on the ground, let's allow him, let's give him room to respond to that particular issue, and that is something we'll inquire in future as well. But let me go to Wakili before I go back to the Senator. We are talking of, in terms of the 100% transition, the Senator has given us an example from Tana River, and of course we have also gotten an excerpt from Joshua. But before we go back to our conversation, to what we were speaking to earlier, in terms of the bursary allocation and what the members of parliament are able to do. We also do have the Goreti North Member of Parliament, that is Beatrice Elachi, here with us in studio, and she'll also be telling us if she has received the NGCDF. But I want to take William Ruto, as we're coming to a wind of this particular conversation, and of course we'll carry it a little bit into our second hour. Let me allow Daktari, given that you're about to leave us in a few. Daktari, we are talking about, you can hear from the excerpt of Kisumu Central, the Member of Parliament was expecting over 184 million in the accounts of Kisumu Central in terms of the NGCDF, so that he be able to allow bursary allocation. Now he has only 30 million to cater for those students. It is give and take, and of course in a situation, in a catch-22 situation, who do you take or who do you leave? The scenario that Senator was playing out here, you have a parent who has 7,000 and a parent who has nothing. So how do you play around with that?
Several issues. One, the MP is just highlighting the problem that the government has not been forthright about.
Yes.
The government has not been forthright to the fact that it is cash strapped. Yeah. Why? Because head teachers have suffered a lot quietly. Government says we'll release money, they don't release money. Failure by government to release money to the schools has caused school heads to have to send away children most of the time to ask parents to pay, because if government has not given its contribution and the parent has not given his or her contribution, the head of the school just can't run the school. Government needs to be forthright on that and tell people this is where our limitations are and this is how we will be able to sequence remission of the funds we ought to remit, so that everyone else plans themselves with that in mind. But having said that, the whole issue of bursary is complicated. Why is it complicated? Because you have so many, this proliferation of everyone's bursary. We have parents who get bursaries from everybody. So that at the end of the day, they are going to school to ask for refund because their son or daughter has overpaid fees that they never contributed to. Why? Because most of the leaders are using these bursaries to buy support. So whoever has the political acumen in the village, you can get money from the MCA, from the MP, from the women rep, from the governor, and you have overpayment. And yet the needy children who are brilliant don't get the fund. So we recommended to the task force, and we are happy that they came up with that as a recommendation, that we create one national bursary system that can then be devolved up to the ward level. And we have all these people who want to support the bursary schemes in the country putting money in that one kitty. So we know at the national level we have 100 billion for bursary. Then we know Nairobi County has received 10 billion out of this 100 billion. Then we know Goreti North, where Mheshimiwa comes from, has received $1 billion. Then we know that out of the $1 billion, each ward has received this much. And each ward has a committee that tells us, we have given this child, and this child, and make it public. So we can verify that those children deserve the bursary and they have actually received the funds. Because of, again, the political support issue, members of parliament have had sometimes to scatter the bursary funds. So give everyone 2,000. So when you have given a child who has 2,000, they still can't go to school. When you have given a child who already the parent is able to pay 2,000, that is just additional money that they use to buy contraband things in school. We need to sort the bursary out. We have the early bursary scheme, the national government scheme. I am aware of a county where an important person in government walked into the office of the county director with a list and said, these are the people who will get the bursary. And this is verifiable because
we cannot verify on our end.
You can't verify.
You can't verify
but I'm telling you that because the committee there had gone around, visited homes to check the economic status of households to verify which child is needy. But I can point out children who didn't get because a list was presented. Said this is the list. So that out. So those are two issues. We sort out the bursary scheme, we sort out timely remission of the funds. The third issue is about who do children belong to? Do they belong to their parents? I have spoken to school heads and told them, you can send away this boy from school because you think the father is just being lazy and everything. This boy will drop out of school, the father will die and leave you with him in the village, he will be your problem. He will not be his father's problem. The father will be long gone. And this fellow will be your problem. The final issue that we have to deal with is to say, when we have put all these resources together, can we get every actor in the sector pull their weight? There is no parent, and I can argue strongly because I grew up in the village where poverty is highest. There's no parent who can pay zero for their child. Because I know parents who farmed cabbages and supplied in school as school fees. I know parents who supplied firewood as school fees for their children. Can we get all actors to work together and each one of them to pull their weight?
Thank you, Daktari.
Can I say something on
Senator, we are still with you.
On that one?
Yes, we are winding up on the first session, but we're still with you and Wakili as well. That's why I want to release Dr. Emmanuel as well as Joshua here. The first part with the education, but we'll have a respite or a rebuttal in the second hour as well. Joshua, your final remarks, given that this is the current situation in various institutions, you're a tutor as well. So what will be your urge to the government in terms of policy and not just even budget implementation that we're watching from the IEA?
I believe the government has done. When I talk about the government, I mean all the people of Kenya. But still, I believe that we need to make education for primary and secondary school free. There is no reason in the 21st century why we cannot do that. The reason why we cannot do that, I believe, is because of priority. The aspect of having bursaries brought together and so many actors contributing, whether it's individual organizations, whether local or international, basically is to ensure that we make education affordable. The major issue or problem here is that if Kenyans do not access education, then we cannot turn around the social economic disparities that we have. And for me, it's not about increment of bursary allocations, because where is the source of this? What is the source of these bursaries? Money. It's from the taxpayer. Why can't we make education free for the public sector? And finally, the major issue will be, if we make education free, the public sector, then the question will be, will the Kenyan children receive quality education? Because you see now, we start talking about now, the number of teachers available, the ballooning number of kids in the schools. But at the end of the day, this is where we will see many parents who are able going to the private sector because they can be able to buy quality education.
Yes. Thank you so much. That is Joshua Nyambane, an educationist, as also a teacher on the ground. We do have Dr. Emmanuel Manyasa, who is the Executive Director of Usawa Agenda. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. But we'll be carrying on our conversation into the second hour. The first 10 minutes, we do have still Mheshimiwa, the Senator for Tana River, that is the Honorable Danson Mungatana. On the other side, we'll also have Honorable Beatrice Elachi, the Dagoretti North Member of Parliament. And finally, who will be Honorable Samuel Masaki, who is the National national youth leader of the United Democratic Alliance, which is the ruling UDA party. This is the conversation we'll be having in the first 5 minutes or so of the second hour until we get into the meat of our second hour conversation, which is the state of corruption in the country, which has also been exacerbated by all the arms of the government, from the executive, judiciary and legislature. Don't go too far. We have to pay some bills. Continue the conversation both on and offline. Don't go too far.